All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Today's lecture is a continuation of genetics. And so today we're going to be taking a little break from protein synthesis, which is what we were doing in our previous two videos. And we're going to go back to thinking about inheritance. So how do genes get passed down from parent to offspring? And specifically today, we are going to talk about sex-linked genes, and I'll talk about why they are called sex-linked genes. The notes that go along with this video are in two parts, and so the first part corresponds to this video, and then the second part corresponds to the next video that I will do on pedigrees. And so if you are watching this video and following along with the notes, then you only need to worry about that first page. But first, let's think about how we inherit sex from our parents. So sex meaning whether you are female or male. And so we have talked about our chromosomes, right? So in humans, we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. And so that means we have 46 in total. And that last pair, that 23rd pair, is actually our sex chromosomes. And so if you are female, then you are born with two X chromosomes. And if you are male, then you would be born with one X chromosome and one Y chromosome. And so that is where all the differences between female and male stem from ultimately. And so we can think about how that happens, right? So we have a father and we have a mother. The mother, right, the female has two X chromosomes, and so she is only ever going to give one X chromosome to her offspring, right? She only has that one possibility. So there is one X chromosome that comes from the mother. And then the father can either give one of his X chromosomes or his Y chromosome. And so ultimately, right, it's going to be the father that determines the sex of the offspring, right? So if his sperm is carrying a Y chromosome from its half of the chromosome pairs, then it would be a male baby. And if it's carrying an X chromosome from its half of the chromosome set, then it would be a female offspring. Of course, there are exceptions to this. Those would be considered mutations, and we will talk a little bit more about that in a future video about mutations. But that is really how it goes. So we can actually even fill out a Punnett square for this, right? So we have the mother up here on the top. So we have X, X, and then the father on the side, XY. And so you can see here, if we fill it in, then you would have 50% of the offspring should be female, 50% of the offspring should be male. And this is, of course, according to probability, right? I'm sure you know families, or you may even be in a family where that is not true, that's not 50-50. But if you look at the overall population, that is generally what the percentages should be, right? So we should have 50% male, 50% female. And like I said, right, the male parent is going to determine the sex of the offspring, right? And so this is an interesting point to make, and this is a little history tangent, but historically, right, if you think about, like, especially European royalty, there was a lot of concern over whether the offspring of the king and the queen would be male or not, right? Because the heir is typically the son. And so there's been, famous historical, stories of kings blaming their wives for not giving them sons and only giving them daughters, but really it's the man's fault. So that's a little bit of trivia for you. Okay, and so like I said, we'll talk more about different types of chromosomal mutations, but here's just some examples. So there's this triple X syndrome. So triple X is what it sounds like. It is when the child receives actually two X chromosomes from the mother, and so they end up with three X chromosomes in total. Okay, and so that can cause certain issues, right, that you see here. Ranging from cognitive effects to, physical effects. You could also have a possibility where you end up somehow getting two Y chromosomes. This is pretty rare. That also can cause certain issues. And then there's also a possibility where you don't get any sex chromosome at all from the father. You just get the one X chromosome from the mother, and that has its own related issues. And you can imagine that individuals who have certain mutations like this, they're not going to follow, certain standard ideas of what male or female might look like. All right, so let's talk about sex-linked genes. And so they are what they sound like. They are genes that are located on the sex chromosomes and specifically on the X and Y chromosomes. Okay, and here is just some closer looks at the X and Y chromosome. And something that you may notice right away is that the Y chromosome is much smaller than the X chromosome. And so it just is going to have less genes on it. It has just less space. It's made of less DNA. And if you look at the picture of the chromosome, you can see it has almost a fuzzy appearance, and that is due to the DNA being all wound up and coiled in there, right? So this is one entire very long DNA molecule, and this is just one, slightly shorter DNA molecule. And so when we talk about sex-linked genes, we are typically going to think about genes located on the X chromosome. This is here, the X chromosome, because it is so much larger. It just has more genetic information stored on it. Another thing to note in this picture, which is related to what we talked about in a previous lecture, is you see these orange ends here. These are the telomeres of the chromosome. Okay, so that's showing the kind of ends of the chromosome. And that has to do with aging. Okay, and we'll talk more about colorblindness and hemophilia as being examples of disorders that are coded for by the X chromosome, and I'll talk about that in a couple slides. Right, okay, here we are. So we're going to take a moment and see if you can read these color blindness tests, okay, these plates that they use to test for color blindness. And so I am not colorblind, and most women or females are not colorblind. So I can read these. So these are all 7s, okay? So these test for different types of color blindness, which I'll show examples of in one moment. All right, so these are all 7s. This is, again, a 7, 13, 16, 8, 12, and 9. See if you can read all of them. If there's one that you maybe cannot read that well, it might be worth going to check with the doctor to see if you have a certain type of color blindness. But they are located, like I said, on the X chromosomes, and they are both recessive traits. And so if you remember, recessive traits require that they have both copies. But really, what it really means is that it can only have that copy. So dominant traits, and this is hopefully a bit of a review for you. Dominant traits, you only need the one copy for it to be expressed. Okay, and so I typically would say, okay, recessive traits need both recessive alleles present for it to be expressed. But if you think about it, these genes are on the X chromosome, but males only have one X chromosome. So they really only have, one possible allele for any kind of X-linked gene. Okay, and so females, we have 2 X chromosomes. So we have, kind of a typical inheritance for it, right? So if you have a recessive trait located on the X chromosome, like color blindness or hemophilia, right, the female is going to need both of those X chromosomes to have that mutated or defective allele, that recessive allele, in order for them to show that color blindness or hemophilia. So you can kind of think of it as females get 2 shots at avoiding these diseases, right? So if they have one X chromosome that has the hemophilia allele, but the other one's normal, then they'll be fine. But males only have one X chromosome, so they just have that one shot, right? So either their X chromosome has the disease gene or it doesn't, okay? And so if it doesn't, they've got the normal copy, then they're fine. But if it has the recessive disease allele, then they're going to show that trait, okay? And so here's how we can represent it with a Punnett square, okay? And so here's an example of color blindness. And so this is showing, right, just the boxes that are filled in with color show that that person is colorblind. The normal vision individuals have the white square or circle, with square being male and circle being female. And so in this situation, okay, we have the mother is on the side here, and she's what we call a carrier. Because if she has 2 X chromosomes and this is a little annoying because the C's, the big one and the small one, look very similar. But she's got one X chromosome with the big C on it. So big C meaning normal vision allele. And then her other X chromosome has a little c on it. And so the little c would be the recessive color blindness allele. And so if you take a look at her circle, it shows half being colorblind and then half being normal. But she is ultimately going to have normal vision, right? Because color blindness is recessive, okay? So she has one normal copy. That means she should have normal vision. And that's why she is called a carrier, because she is carrying the disease allele, but she's not showing it, okay? Now let's take a look at the father. The father, he only has the one X chromosome, right? Color blindness is represented with that C on the X, and he's got normal vision. So he's got one copy of the normal allele, the big C. Give me a moment, excuse me. Okay, and so let's take a look, right? Their children are going to come out like this, right? So this first daughter here is getting an X chromosome with the normal allele on it from her mother. And she's also getting another X chromosome with a normal allele on it from the father, right? Okay. And then now let's take a look at the other daughter. The other daughter is getting now the disease allele from her mother, but she's still getting the normal allele from the dad, right? The dad only has a normal allele to give to his daughters. So this daughter is going to have normal vision, but she's also going to be a carrier because she is getting that disease allele from the mother. So she's kind of carrying it on, but both daughters should have normal vision. Okay, now so let's take a look at the sons. The first son, right, he is getting that normal X chromosome from the mother, and then the Y chromosome from the father is not carrying any alleles on it. So he's going to have normal vision, right? Because he got the normal vision allele from mom. The other son, not so lucky, he's getting the disease allele from the mother. And since he only has one X chromosome, he doesn't have another chance. He doesn't have another X chromosome with the normal allele on it to kind of save him from being colorblind. So he is going to have the color blindness, okay? And so ultimately, the point is that for recessive traits, okay, they're going to show themselves as long as there's no dominant gene present as well, okay? All right, let's process that for a little bit, and I'll keep going. All right, here's just some examples of color blindness, what it might look like to someone who has color blindness. So if you have normal vision, these are the range of colors that you would be able to see. Okay, and then there's different types of color blindness depending on which rods or cones in your eyes are affected. This is ultimately showing, right, kind of what colors you're missing out on. So this would be showing that you have mostly like a green scale vision. Okay, deuteranopia and protanopia are pretty similar, okay. Tritanopia is a little different, right? You can see the range here is very different. And then here would be, you know, examples of what you would be seeing if you looked at these balloons. Okay, what you would see if you were looking at one of those color blindness tests. You can also find videos of this, which is what I have here. And I will link this so you can just watch it on your own time. All right, so here is another example of a color blindness, sorry, not color blindness, another example of a sex-linked disease called hemophilia. You might have heard of it before, but ultimately what it is the protein that you have in your blood that normally helps it to clot, right? So when you get a cut, you stop bleeding after a while because it starts to clot up. That's missing in people with hemophilia. So they just keep bleeding. And you can imagine that's quite dangerous, okay, because something like a simple nosebleed, you could literally die from it if you have hemophilia. Okay, so here is what it would be in a normal healthy person. If there is some breakage in the blood vessel, it will eventually clot up. With someone with hemophilia, it's going to just keep going. It's just never going to clot up. And so, like I said, it can be very dangerous. But luckily, people with hemophilia in modern times, they can take medicine that contains this protein, and then that will help them to clot their blood. Okay. but it's also on the X chromosome. And so we can represent it now with an H, which I prefer because uppercase H's and lowercase h's look different. But here's another example, and it's set up just like the one that I was talking you through earlier, where we have a carrier mother and an unaffected father, right? So the mother has one normal copy and one disease copy, okay? And then the father, his X chromosome is normal. So any daughters that he's going to produce are going to have at least one normal copy. So you can see here both of his daughters have at least one big H on their X chromosomes, and they're all unaffected. Okay, so his daughters are safe. However, because the mom is a carrier, it's possible that half of their sons are going to have hemophilia, right? Because she could give the son a normal X chromosome with the normal hemophilia gene on it, or she could give the son a X chromosome with the disease allele on it, okay, with the small h and the red. Okay, and so that's how inheritance works for X-linked traits. It's really the same way that we have been doing with the Mendelian traits, with the Punnett squares, dominant versus recessive, except it's going to affect how each sex is going to show their traits, right? So the daughters are 100% normal, but the sons are 50% normal, 50% affected. Okay. So that's how it is for sex-linked traits. And we can try another problem here, and this one is a little different. So we have a carrier mother, okay, and then in this example I've chosen color blindness. And however, this time the male is colorblind. So you can see here he has a small lowercase b representing the colorblind allele on his X chromosome, okay? And so if we take a look at this Punnett square that I've set up, then we can work out, well, what percentage of their female children will be colorblind that you would expect, and what percent of their male children would you expect to be colorblind? Okay, and so let's take a moment to fill this out, you know, either on a piece of paper or in your mind. But ultimately, you should get, oops, why is this not on here? You should get 50% of the daughters, okay, are going to be colorblind, right? So this daughter is going to get at least one normal allele from the mom, so she'll be fine. But this daughter is going to get a small b from mom and a small b from dad, so she is going to be colorblind. Okay, this son right here will be normal vision. He gets the normal vision from his mom. But this son will be colorblind because he's getting that other colorblind copy from the mom. So it'll be 50% for each. Okay. So to sum it up a little bit, I wanted to compare the different types of inheritance that we have seen. And so I'm just going to introduce some vocabulary to kind of sum that up. And so when we first started talking about genetics, right, we talked about something like this, right, where we have dominant versus recessive, and we just represent that with a simple uppercase or lowercase letter. So this example would be with the flower color that, you know, the pea plants that Mendel was studying. And so we call this Mendelian genetics after Mendel, okay, that old monk from a long time ago. All right, so it's one allele is going to be dominant or the other, okay, and so that's pretty straightforward in terms of how we can work it out using a Punnett square. And we call this autosomal inheritance, okay? And the reason we call it autosome, you're going to see the some at the end, is referring to any chromosome that is not a sex chromosome. So it's the first 22 pairs of chromosomes, right? They're not the sex chromosomes. It's only the last 23rd pair that's sex chromosomes, right? And so genes that we will find on those chromosomes are going to just act independent of whether the individual is male or female. And so we can call that autosomal inheritance, okay? And you can think of this kind of Punnett square. We also talked about incomplete and codominance, right? And so this, you can still use Punnett square for all of these, right? But it's talking about a mix of phenotypes, right? So either you have like the totally mixed color or you have stripes or spots, okay? And then today we talked about sex-linked traits, right? Where the alleles are on that 23rd pair of sex chromosomes, okay? And so they're going to have these X and Ys, okay? We will only be focusing on genes that are on the X chromosome, all right? And so instead of, let me go back, instead of just having the one letter to represent the situation, we're going to attach that letter to an X to show that it's on the X chromosome. It's a sex-linked or X-linked trait. Okay, and so here would be the different combinations that would produce a dominant phenotype, right? So you see here, any genotype that includes at least one big letter that's attached to the X. And then the recessive phenotypes would be any combination that only has small recessive alleles. Okay, so the small letter. Okay, so here is a comparison chart that I've given to you. And so there is a space, I believe, on the notes to fill this out if you are following along, but it just sums up, right? Autosomal is talking about genes that are on the first 22 pairs, okay? We just use the one letter to represent it. Okay, the sex of the offspring does not affect the inheritance pattern, right? So you can just calculate the probabilities of the offspring without thinking about male versus female, okay? And then any heterozygous individual can be a carrier, right? And so a male could be a carrier, a female could be a carrier, as long as they have just that one copy of the recessive trait, they're carrying that recessive trait. And we can compare that to sex-linked traits, right? The genes are located on the X chromosome, right? The alleles are going to be represented with that superscript letter on top of the X. The sex of the offspring does affect the inheritance pattern, right? So the percentages of the females versus the males is possibly going to be different. And then in the case of sex-linked traits, only females can be carriers of recessive traits because only females have two copies of the X chromosome, right? So they have the possibility of being heterozygous, whereas males only have the one X chromosome. So if they've got that one X chromosome and it's got a bad gene on it, then that's their one shot, okay? So that was a bit of a quick introduction, honestly, to sex-linked traits. I do hope it wasn't too confusing. Again, all of this information that I am presenting to you through these videos is kind of just for your own benefit if you're interested in learning about this stuff. And I will, of course, link more materials for you to practice this information. Okay, and so we've hit 23 minutes on my video, so I think this is a good place to stop. And I will do a short video on pedigrees next time, and so you can kind of preview them on the notes, pedigrees being kind of like family trees. And that's another good way for us to analyze genetic inheritance. But that's it for today, okay? Again, please leave me feedback. And just let me know how it's going for you in terms of using these videos to learn hopefully a little bit about genetics. Okay, but I will see you next time, and good luck. I do miss all of you very much, and I hope that we can return to school as soon as possible. All right, bye-bye.